So those findings are extremely important in terms of a descriptive picture of how the poor use ICTs and why they use them. But one of the key issues is trying to understand if there's a relationship between ICT usage, or mostly mobile usage, and poverty or poverty reduction. And so that gets into the complex issue of causality. Is there a relationship there? We know generally through a lot of studies that there is a positive relationship, but it's never clear, especially amongst studies that look at the poor, it's never clear whether it's the fact that they get richer that leads them to owning more mobiles, or if it's the other way around. So to try to better understand that, partners in East Africa, which was, developed a research project led by the University of KwaZulu-Natal that looked at, called Picture, and it actually tried to do what's called a panel study, which is essentially looking at household data at 2 points in time and trying to understand, trying to control for a whole bunch of other factors that might help better establish whether ICT ownership and usage is actually related to poverty reduction or income growth amongst the poor.
In Tanzania, there was an experimental design that was looking at 2 villages. One village where they did not receive any ICTs, and a second village where they received 5 months of mobile phone airtime and access to internet. And what they were able to find was that the group that received the mobile and internet provisions had a greater reduction in poverty than the control group that did not receive the access to ICTs. They also looked at a multi-dimensions of poverty, and they looked at 7 dimensions, and what they found was the group that received the ICTs found 5 out of the 7 poverty dimensions addressed, whereas the group that did not receive the intervention saw only 2 dimensions out of the 7 of change in poverty.
And what it found is that there is a small but still positive relationship between the technology and poverty reduction. And that it would seem, even more interestingly, that that role of mobiles is especially important for the poorest of the poor, that they actually get more benefit from it than the less poor. And that's hugely interesting, because up until now, the assumption had been that actually technology is likely leading to greater inequalities. It was clearly understood that it led to the investments in technology led to growth. There seemed to be some established consensus around that. But there was a lot of literature that essentially said that there was possibly, at least in the short term, possibly medium term, some relationship to greater inequality. And that seems fairly commonsensical, because the assumption is that richer people can take advantage of the technology and therefore get more benefit out of it than the poor. So what Picture did is really question that. It really kind of put a wrench in that theory, because it helps to show that it's actually the poorest of the poor that seem to be getting more proportional benefit than the less poor.
A lesson to be learned from the research is that investments in ICT infrastructure still must remain as an issue to be addressed in the sphere of poverty. That if we're going to tackle the issue of poverty and see the eradication of poverty, that ICTs is definitely a part of that strategy.
But the key trends that we are finding is that mobile internet is taking off. And surprisingly, it's not policy or regulation that caused this trend, but user-generated content like YouTube and Facebook and other social networking that brings young people to the internet. And in Africa, we've seen that maybe over the last 5-6 years, there hasn't been really any increase in the number of internet users due to limitations. And these limitations are access to electricity at home, cost of a computer, and also the ability to use and maintain a computer. The mobile phone bridges all of these three. First of all, you don't need electricity at home. You can charge it on the roadside or in a shop. It's much easier to use. And it's also prepaid, and therefore overcomes the difficulties that one would have with having a computer and fixed broadband, where you need to have a salary, you need to have an address, you need to own a property, and poor people normally don't qualify for any of those. So the mobile phone bridges major obstacles, and therefore suddenly we see a boom of tripling and quadrupling of user internet subscribers. And we interviewed students in one of the poor neighborhoods in Windhoek and asked them what they used the mobile internet for. And they said they are browsing cases. They were law students on the internet using a mobile phone. And that intrigued me, and I was wondering why. Isn't there access in the university? And they said, like, yes, there is access, but you have to book a computer. It takes maybe about an hour that you have it on a computer. Then you get viruses, it's very slow. It's a very complicated process. So they rather read law cases on a very small screen on their mobile phone, because it's more convenient than having to go to the university and do it there. And you have access all the time to it.
It would seem that internet access through mobile amongst the poorest of the poor is not happening to the same extent in South Asia as it is in Africa. Now, of course, the leader in this area is China. For sure, that's a booming sector for them. But in South Asia, for some reason, there are still some bottlenecks for that. And yet in Africa, it is growing. And so that's a bit of a surprise. But another issue is just around the regulatory environment that tends to spur access or not. And here's where Latin America is a bit of a surprise case, because in Latin America, costs of mobiles are much higher than in Africa or Asia, which leads the poor in Latin America to actually have much higher expenditures on mobile than in the other regions. And that seems to be linked to the regulatory environment. There's essentially a duopoly in Latin America with very big international operators who seem to be having a role in ensuring that prices are much higher than anywhere else. So if anything, hopefully this kind of research can help to inform that situation and ensure that ICTs become more affordable in Latin America.
Compañeros, en efecto, este contrato de asignación adicional de la red de cuarta generación a las operadoras móviles privadas del país se indicó estará vigente hasta el año 2023. La red 4G permitirá mayor velocidad de navegación en Internet.
Somos parte de los países que lideramos los procesos de modernización de las telecomunicaciones en la región.
Según el vicepresidente de la República, las telefónicas Otecel, Movistar y Conecel Claro invertirían en los próximos 5 años entre 800 y 1.000 millones de dólares en el despliegue de la tecnología 4G.
Tener recursos para que también más ecuatorianos puedan acceder a terminales, puedan acceder a Internet en las escuelas, puedan acceder a Internet en las universidades.
Actualmente en el país existen dispositivos que son compatibles con la red de cuarta generación. La migración de la tecnología 3G a 4G se podría hacer aproximadamente en un mes. Se afirmó que con esta nueva tecnología los usuarios podrán mejorar la calidad de sus comunicaciones, permitiendo acceder en tiempo real a contenidos multimedia. Compañeros, hasta aquí nuestro informe. Buenas tardes.